Hello and welcome everyone. My name's Zach White. I work with the GSMA's Digital Utilities program, and I'll be giving a brief introduction to our session today. I'll give some background to the work along with my colleague Samuel Miles from UC Berkeley. We'll then turn to an excellent panel moderated by my colleague George Kabala-Bauer, and then there'll be time at the end for a 10-minute Q&A. So first, introducing our program. The GSMA Digital Utilities is part of the broader GSMA, which represents the interests of mobile operators worldwide, and the Mobile for Development program, which works at the intersection of digital technology and the development space. Our program specifically looks at energy, water, sanitation, waste management, and transport in an urban context. We have benefited from long-standing support from the UK Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office. I'm also pleased to announce that at MWC Barcelona, we announced our partnership is extended for another 5 years until 2029. We work in 4 main areas. The first is we provide innovation funding to startups, de-risking, non-diluting grants. Alongside that, and based on the learning from these organizations, we conduct research and insights, which is where I sit. We also work on partnership facilitation and technical advice, particularly with mobile operators or around their services. Sticking with the innovation funding aspect of our work, because it's really relevant to our discussion today, across all the sectors we've worked in to date, we've made about £24 million in grants to 130 organisations. Those organisations have impacted 47 million people with the services they provide. And particularly important to the discussion today, within 2 years of receiving a grant from us, those organisations have collectively raised over £600 million in follow-on funding. And it's really that is the foundation for why our program wanted to look at the relationship between digital and innovative finance, which is the main focus of our discussion today. And finally, with those 130 organizations, we've facilitated nearly 90 operator partnerships. So turning to just some broad framing statistics for our discussion. There is an annual 4.2 trillion SDG financing gap. There is, well, it's very unlikely that will be filled in any meaningful way to 2030. But what is also clear is that donor and philanthropic funding alone will not fill that gap, and that for many services, particularly in the utility sectors, that capital needs to be deployed alongside private investment. And innovative finance, as variously defined, is still only a very small proportion of that official development assistance. Next, I'd highlight the opportunity in the form of access to mobile services. So nearly 60% of the world use mobile internet and 54% own a smartphone. I'd add that 90% of the world's population have some form of devices which provides access to digital services and payments, of course. And that would be the next big point on the opportunity. Yesterday, we released our annual State of the Industry report, and it showed that there's now 1.4 trillion circulating annually in the mobile money ecosystem, which is about a 14% year-on-year growth. That number is so enormous, I think it needs some frame as reference. It's about half of all African GDP, sub-Saharan African GDP. I'd also add that from that report, we've seen double-digit growth, both in registered and active accounts. And though mobile money is now very much a maturing industry, but for many people, it remains that first and fundamental access to financial services, and especially combined with mobile internet opens the door to a lot of new services. Next, I'd highlight the innovation ecosystem, which is a lot of the time the conduit for this innovative finance and is the lens that we look at it through. Since 2019, African founded or HQ'd tech startups have received 16.5 billion in investment, and the figure is much higher in Asia for all VC funding, so without those caveats at 80 billion-ish. And finally, there is the much broader opportunity, which is sustainable investing, which is relevant to our discussion on carbon credits today. A third of all assets under management in the wealthiest economies fall into that category, and that's roughly a 30 trillion lump of capital. So I'd now like to highlight from the research that we published recently the 5 instruments we pulled out as having most promise for early stage companies and startups. They're presented here on an axis from their ticket size, starting from the tens of thousands up to the hundreds of millions, and on a rough scale of whether they're commercially focused or impact focused. The first 2 are those that are more impact focused, and they're what we will be looking at today. As I mentioned, my colleague Samuel Miles will take us through those in more detail, so I won't say much more on those. What I will say is that we'll also be holding a second webinar in about a month, focused on those instruments that are more towards the commercial end of capital deployment. This slightly intimidating slide is an overview of how we thought about innovation. And I wanted to pause for a moment in my introduction to talk about what we can call innovation or innovative finance. Because I think a first remark is that carbon credits and RBF themselves might, perhaps rightly, not be called that innovative. And they really sit at the top of the 3 lenses that we used, which is the particular financing instrument that you use to deliver a piece of funding or an investment. But I'd highlight that we additionally used 2 other lenses to examine the relationship between financing and digital innovation. The second of which was the enabling technologies. So at the middle there, we're talking about things like sensors or analytics, the ways that you acquire, use data and package it. And then at the bottom, we separated out the transaction mechanisms, particularly distinguishing between conventional banking systems and those new payment systems existing within the fintech space. And finally, we also think that the context in which these are applied itself can often be innovative, be it a sector or a particular geography. And I think I'll move on from that, but I'd encourage everyone to have a look at the report where we work through this in a lot more detail, including defining what we consider at the core and at the edge. This is a QR code for the report and a little bit of a plug. I'd encourage everyone to have a look or access it through that short URL. We identified 80 in-scope use cases, which were any funding deal that was at the edge of 2 or more of those of that framework. The report looks at 11 promising or maturing financing instruments and provides those 5 in detailed case studies from those I presented earlier. We profile 30 organizations or deals and provide hundreds of examples. So if you're looking to really make concrete what we talk about today and see some of the companies or the deals that reflect what we're talking about, you can look at that report. So I think that's it from me. I'll now hand over to my colleague Samuel Miles, who will take us through the 2 instruments we're looking at in more detail today. Thank you.
Thank you, Zach. It was a pleasure working with the GSMA on this. So again, hi everyone, my name is Sam and I wear a number of hats, but as lead author of this report, what I'm talking about today, what we're talking about is expansion of access to basic services and how to achieve more targeted results. So this graphic up on your screen is based on expert consultation in a science policy paper by Dan Kamen at Berkeley, and a few others recommending an action agenda for the electricity sector in Africa, which I think highlights well the diversity in policy and operating environments just in one single continent, one sector. Across geographies, though, the authors found in that paper two key levers for expanding access: the use of catalytic financial incentives and the opportunities of digitalization. So the report we're focusing on today illustrates how these levers are being applied successfully, not only in the African energy sectors, but those in Southeast Asia and also in water, waste, sanitation, transportation, agriculture, and nature-based solutions. So my task in the next couple of minutes is to try to unpack two types of financial instruments we observed in these markets that leverage data in innovative ways, and to frame the role of technology in unlocking results-based and climate finance for social enterprises. So next slide, please. So let's start with results-based finance. What is it? So to access an RBF mechanism, there needs to be some kind of program in place with targeted outcomes in a given geography, perhaps associated with one of the sustainable development goals, like access to energy, water, or food. Then an enterprise registers in this program and delivers the utility or social service, a grid connection, for example, or a solar system, or a certain amount of clean water, for example, to an end user specifically or a beneficiary. Next slide, please. I think you skipped one ahead, so we can just jump back one. Thank you. In a digitally verified results-based financing initiative, information about the delivery of the service is automatically relayed to a designated verification platform, usually through GSM-connected asset monitoring, satellite-based Earth observation, digital payment transaction data, or phone-based verification. Next slide, please. These platform operators then provide audits of the information to the program funder, which disperses grant capital, essentially subsidies, to the social enterprise based on performance against pre-agreed indicators. Next slide, please. So our report features RBF innovations across several sectors and geographies. For instance, in rural water, the Uptime Consortium has been pushing the conversation on public finance to participate in their top-up subsidy disbursement model. But our research really suggests that most of the maturity in terms of digitization across sectors lies in energy. So some key actors at the global level here include the Universal Energy Facility, spearheaded by the United Nations through SE for All. And of course, we have Susan here from Odyssey, who we're looking forward to hearing more from about country-specific and country-translatable insights from Nigeria experience. Next slide, please. So now, moving on to climate finance, and it's important here to be specific because climate finance can have a lot of overlap with results-based finance. So in this report and for the conversation today, we're focusing specifically on credits exchanged through voluntary carbon markets. So how does this work? Similar to in an RBF, step one is an organization delivers climate positive services, more specifically in this case through quantifiable carbon avoidance, sequestration, or mitigation activities, like the reduction of kerosene usage or number of trees planted. Next slide, please. These impacts are continuously monitored by specialized verification providers, largely employing Earth observation satellites, which can measure things like deforestation, afforestation, and other attributes of land use change at a higher frequency in terms of flyover rates, higher resolution in terms of meters or centimeters per pixel, and lower latency in terms of how fresh the image the decision maker ultimately gets. Next slide, please. So the key difference between RBF and voluntary carbon markets comes in step 4, where rather than some direct payout based on pre-agreed conditions in voluntary carbon exchanges, the verification provider generates some kind of credit or token or certification. Next slide, please. And then finally sells on an exchange platform to public and private sector buyers in the form of units of social or environmental value, like a ton of carbon reduced. Next slide, please. And so we're super excited to have some grounded conversations about the role of digital technologies in unlocking social and climate value with Ben from ATEC here and Stephen from A2EI, both leading organizations at the frontier of both RBF and climate finance. And in the report, as Zach mentioned, and the companion guide we're releasing this next week, we feature key profiles from a number of other leaders employing digital technology in the space, like Sun Culture, Cocoa Networks, and the DREC Initiative, among others. Next slide, please. Oh, this one, yes. So before I hand it off to George and our panelists, I wanted to highlight an intersection point between what we could call a DRBF and a DMRV, and that's the conversation on co-benefits. So for those of you unfamiliar with co-benefits, a key part of what distinguishes RBFs from carbon exchanges is that in the latter, the price of a unit can fluctuate based on perception of quality, supply, and demand. And this graph shows the price distribution for carbon emission reductions in an analysis published in Nature recently, quantifying the spread in prices paid across different types of buyers. And I think it highlights the key point that projects with a likelihood of delivering the highest co-benefits receive a significantly higher price, around 30%, compared to projects with the lowest co-benefits. So if I could add in one last point, as we perhaps think about how to price social and environmental co-benefits, I'd like to add another lens through which to view access to basic services, their direct impact on human health. Next slide, please. So very quickly, I mentioned I wear a few hats, one of which is working on my doctorate at the University of California, Berkeley. My research focuses on digital technologies and healthcare electrification, specifically in North Kivu, Eastern DRC. So we have some folks who can speak to that geography on the panel today. And we work in collaboration with La Division Provinciale de la Santé, the Rural and Peri-Urban Electrification Agency, and now the Electricity Regulator. And we're working on a number of projects related to the discussion at hand today, including an IoT monitored health facility electrification as a service demonstration. So if you'd like to learn more about this co-production process, please drop me a line at samuel.b.miles@berkeley.edu, and I'll put that in the chat as well. So with that, I'll thank the GSMA for the opportunity to contribute to this important conversation at the intersection of digital innovation, technology, and pro-justice finance. Thank you all for being here. George, over to you.
Thanks a lot, Sam. And it was a pleasure to work with you, Zach, and the Mondato team in general on the report. I hope everyone gets the chance to take a look, but I'm really excited to get to the next section of the event, which is the panel discussion. So I'll introduce the panel and then say a few words about why I think discussing this subject now is particularly relevant, and also give you some house rules in terms of how you can contribute to the discussion online. So without further ado, I'll be joined by Susan Smith, the Vice President of Public Sector Financing Solutions at Odyssey, Stefan Zelazny, Managing Director at the Access to Energy Institute, Kyle Hamilton, the Senior Manager of Strategy and Partnerships at Nuru, and Ben Jeffries, the CEO at ATEC. As you'll note, I haven't introduced the organizations in much detail because throughout the discussion there'll be lots of opportunities for you to learn more about the work they're doing. But just to introduce the discussion a bit before I jump into the questions to our excellent panel, I wanted to build on some of the things that Sam and Zach have been talking about. So we obviously know that a lot of solar companies, clean cooking companies are currently operating in a very challenging environment. Macroeconomically, there's also a funding gap that the sector faces at large, and there's a need for catalytic capital. Some of the panelists like Susan and I were at the Transforming Energy Access Summit in Kigali last week, and some of these subjects were also really very relevant to the discussion there. And I think the question is now, how can we ensure that different companies within the sector can access catalytic capitals at scale, and how can digital technologies enable that? And the other point that's important to mention is how can we ensure that this financing can be accessed in an inclusive manner and not just be accessible to the leading players within the industry. So I'm really looking forward to delving a bit deeper on these subjects with the panel. I just wanted to flag, if you do want to ask questions to the panel, we do have an extensive Q&A component to the discussion at the very end. Please drop in some comments on the LinkedIn Live feature, and we'll be sure to get back to your questions. And then I also just wanted to say, as Zach and Sam mentioned, some of the points on the more commercially focused instruments that were featured in the report will be subject to another webinar in about a month from now. So also stay tuned for that. But let me now turn to the panel and really focus on the subject matter at hand. First, maybe over to you, Susan, since Sam also kind of touched on results-based financing first. Can you describe how Odyssey works and how it is using digital technology to improve the effectiveness of results-based financing programs in the energy sector across low and middle income countries and emerging markets?
Yeah, thanks, George. Thanks for the introduction and for bringing this great group of people together to talk about how we can leverage technology to make a real impact. So Odyssey, if I can step back 1 second, Odyssey is a digital technology company, a digital technology platform that specifically targets distributed renewable energy. So that can mean anything from a small generation source at the edge of the grid where power is reliable. It can mean small solar home systems, rooftop solar. It can mean mini grids that are operating in isolated communities, or again, communities at the grid edge. And even on the more commercial end of things, solar PV installations on commercial and industrial sites. So all of this sort of looks as distributed renewable energy. And of course, to simplify greatly, one of the great challenges is that if you're looking at a utility scale solar farm, or you're looking at utility scale generation, you have a very small number of very big things. And in distributed renewable energy, you have a very large number of very small things, and that creates economies of scale problems. We know we have a huge energy access gap to fill, and we know we are losing speed, and we have to do everything we can to accelerate the closing of that gap. And that is sort of the genesis of Odyssey. The idea is we have digital tools available to us. If there's anything that we can standardize, digitize, handle remotely, aggregate, then we should be building tools to do that, so that the companies like Kyle's and others that are on the ground doing the work that for which there are not that many shortcuts, we can be providing something of a backbone to assist the sector in other ways. So for us, Odyssey's been around about 7 years. The initial digital tools that we've built were in the first case around planning. So renewable energy companies can come onto Odyssey. They can use built-in tools that are available to plan out their sites, estimate what the demand would be in a given community, translate that into what their PV system design should look like to address that load, run some modeling within the platform to determine how that system design would perform, and then walk through the companies through a series of steps, estimating their costs, looking at their tariff model, and resulting in a financial model at the end that gives you some of the key parameters of what this particular site or this particular deployment would be looking like. And that does several things for us. Having that all digitally accessible allows us to aggregate all of these different sites in a very easy way. It allows for financiers looking to put money into the sector to have a real apples to apples comparison, and to just streamline a process that can be really disaggregated and look different from company to company. So that was sort of one set of tools. And the other set of tools we built was really just around integrating in the back end with all of these different manufacturers and devices and systems through a variety of different ways to pull data from them. We know that data is critical to decision-making in the sector, to demystifying the sector, to driving capital into the sector. So we are able to connect to smart meters and inverters, other equipment through cloud-based API integrations, through hardware. We have a hardware suite that we can deploy on site and pull a variety of different operators into one view. So getting back to results-based financing, those two pieces came together really in their first application in some of these results-based financing programs. Because we're looking at scale, you have large donors who want to help countries run rural electrification programs where we're talking, thousands and millions in need of access. And you need, on the one hand, for the program administrators who need to decide how the grants will flow out to subsidize this work and these connections. They need to have a really quick and smooth and efficient way to understand what's coming in. And then once the grants are deployed and people have built their systems, because it's results-based financing, these companies aren't getting paid until they've shown results. So they are saying, hey, we've connected 200 households, or I've sold 10,000 solar home systems. In the old days, someone would get on the phone and call and find out, is there really a system on your roof? Have you really been connected to the mini grid? And because we're able to integrate on the back end with these devices, we can say, no. Immediately you can see there's a live connection. Maybe you want to see not only is there a live connection, but that it's still being used 30, 60, 90 days later, which is important for some of these programs as well. So we can show that as well, build in the verification rules so they know when then they can pay out. And the proof has really been in the pudding. We've done this in, I think, over 10 different countries now. And the before and after, before this remote verification is deployed and after, in terms of the speed of the payout, the amount that the companies are able to recoup on legitimate sales and deployments is really night and day. So when we're talking about scale and we're talking about speed to close that gap, I think the digital technology assistance here is absolutely critical. I'll pause there.
Thanks a lot, Susan. Great overview of what you're doing at Odyssey, and also highlighting the importance of your work to the broader sector and accessing results-based financing quickly when connections are made. I'll turn to you again later, but I wanted to use the points that you made to turn to Kyle, because obviously you're at the front lines of delivering projects with your work at Nuru, and for me it's really an honor to have you on the panel as well, because you're doing work in Eastern Congo. I have family there. It's been great to see some of your projects firsthand in Eastern Congo as well. So just turning to you right now, I would love to know, what's Nuru's mission, and how are you using digital and remote technologies as part of your business model, first of all? And then secondly, how are you working with donors, funders, and government organizations to leverage the digital platforms that you have in your business model to access results-based financing?
Yeah, great. Thank you, George. It's wonderful to be here, and thanks to GSMA for organizing this really interesting panel discussion. So my name is Kyle Hamilton, and I work with Nuru, and our mission is to provide 10 million people with world-class power by December 2030. And that's a new mission that we've just set in recent weeks. So I'm excited to share it publicly for the first time, I think, in an event like this. Nuru is a mini grid developer. So we finance, we build, we operate solar-based mini grids and metro grids in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And currently we have 4 assets under management, totaling 1.69 megawatts. And we just closed Series B equity financing to scale our business. And we're going to go from 3,000 customers under our current assets to 30,000 customers by deploying an additional 13.7 megawatts during the next 2 years. So we're really excited about what we're doing and growing, and results-based financing and support from partners like Odyssey has been crucial along our growth trajectory to date, and we see that increasing into the future. So to talk about some of these key pieces, we see results-based financing being really critical to play a catalytic role to unlock additional financing, both equity and debt, for what we're trying to do and providing world-class energy services to communities in DRC. And results-based financing for us just really makes a lot of sense. We get paid for delivering the energy we're promising, and that enables us to go to equity and debt and say, hey, we have this funding that's going to provide some de-risking and catalytic capacity to unlock this new funding and de-risk you coming in to invest in what we're trying to do in some of the most challenging contexts in the world where there is active armed conflict nearby, or just really challenging logistical and kind of a business context as well to navigate. And so I think results-based financing makes a lot of sense for us. And we have worked in particular in different programs. Some have been digitally based and some have not been digitally based. And we've seen the difference in terms of the amount of errors, the challenges, the time, the cost to doing on-the-ground verification without any digital technologies involved. And we've seen also the benefits of working with partners like Odyssey and Susan and her team to share our smart metering data directly through an API integration on Odyssey's platform, where our partners, our donors can verify and see the data and then do some additional on-the-ground verification process through just sampling a few specific customers to understand and to triangulate that data. So I think that's the real benefit. It's kind of the efficiency, it saves money, it saves time, and it really, brings together different types of data so everybody can see and really verify both on the ground and digitally together.
Thanks a lot, Kyle, and also great to hear about your existing collaboration with Odyssey on that topic. I'll turn to you guys again later, but I wanted to give Stefan from Access to Energy Institute also the chance to come in. The Access to Energy Institute obviously has an open source platform which seeks to democratize access to a lot of different players to scale their renewable energy solutions. And I would love to know, how you're using digital and remote sensing technologies to really scale access to energy and productive use appliances across different countries, and why it's so important to also have an open source platform doing it to ensure that also local distributors and innovators which face somewhat bigger funding challenges can access these catalytic financing tools.
Thanks, George, and thanks for having me on the panel. It's a very interesting round here. I think with many of you, I already had certain interactions, or we at ATUI had certain interactions. Maybe just quickly to the ATUI, the Access to Energy Institute is a non-for-profit organization. It's mainly a tech tank, so to say, with a mission to provide technical solutions. It can be hardware, it can be software, it could also be data, or is it technologies around data to the access to energy sector. And we try to basically be at a focal point of these different technologies to combine them and create additional values out of this. So basically, the key focus areas of the work are: A, is the replacement of fossil fuel generators, which basically has been at the core of the mission of the ATUI since 5 years now, especially focusing here in Nigeria, where we have 20 million of fossil-driven fuel generators. And we try to develop a sustainable commercial market to enable solar-driven gensets, so-called solar generators, to exactly one-on-one replace these fossil fuel-driven generators by local distributors using existing technologies, but enhancing the existing technologies of manufacturers to make it more robust for the difficulties in the particular environment, but also enable them with a digital IoT tracking, with an opportunity to use a pay-as-you-go functionality to develop certain, let's say, business models that have been successful in the small systems and in the clean cooking area, but not so much, let's say, at larger CNI related systems, to really replace the 20 millions and more gensets in Nigeria alone. Second key focus area of the ATUI is the smart metering. So basically we do this at different areas. For instance, a lot around clean, especially electric cooking appliances, to understand basically what drives people to use electric cooking appliances. How are they integrating this in their cook stove, like in their general set of cooking appliances? What is the impact on the grid if you roll out electric cooking at large scale? Basically, what does it mean? What are important lessons for utilities to improve their network before rolling it maybe out at big scale and then having a bigger disappointment on the customer base, which might have a negative effect on a desired outcome. And last but not least, obviously you mentioned already, Georgia development of Prospect, which in itself is a co-project of the A2I with GetPro. It's part of the German GIZ, which is supported by Norway, Sweden, the Netherlands, Austria, Germany, and the European Union. I always have to mention everybody, as an open source, free-to-use data infrastructure layer. So basically, it's not only a particular solution that is running, let's say, in competition to existing data solutions, but really we envision Prospect as a certain data infrastructure layer that is available, free to use for all players in the sector, not only the vertically integrated or large, very digitally, let's say, educated players in the market, but especially small and medium enterprises, which we believe will carry the main burden of the access to energy market in the future, and are still basically very, let's say, falling behind when using digital technologies and benefiting from, let's say, result-based financing, but also carbon credit financing. Maybe quickly, the core idea of Prospect is to use the existing many amounts of automated data points that are already available. Let it be IoT sensor data, let it be mobile money transaction data, let it be CRM data, and combine these. And through the combination of these data points, without reinventing the wheel, adding additional value, but also enabling value-added services on top of Prospect to create this value. So we see Prospect is here really like a publicly available infrastructure layer without discrimination. And just to wrap this up, just last week, the A2I, we launched the so-called Green Genset facility at the TA conference in Kigali, and basically which aims to provide pre-financed stock to local distributors who do not have access to inventory finance. And the GGF, the Green Genset facility, heavily relies on the data that is collected, streamlined, and analyzed by Prospect or other data platforms in advance to reduce the time that is needed of the assessment of a local distributor, but to ramp up basically the delivery of stock to the distributors at a record time without a very cumbersome due diligence process and so on, but really using live data on portfolio performance, contractual performance on delivery, but also quality of service based on IoT data.
Thanks a lot, Stefan, and it was really exciting to be last week at the launch of the Green Diesel Genset facility, and I think it's really exciting work. Actually, the first time I came across the work of the Access to Energy Institute was when I saw your paper on sort of the diesel genset replacement opportunity in Nigeria, and I recommend everyone to read that paper because the figures in there are just staggering in terms of comparing the diesel genset generation capacity in Nigeria compared to the generation capacity of the grid. And I think with the fuel subsidy removal in Nigeria recently, I think this topic is even more interesting. But you also mentioned, you're working in the electric cooking space. So I'd like to segue to Ben as well. But before that, I wanted to also reflect on some of the points that the other panelists have made on digital measurement, reporting, and verification, which is in the sort of carbon credit space known as DMRV. But as we've seen, also plays a huge role in RBF. And one of the key aims of this discussion is also to bring together different forms of financing that are using similar digital tools for measurement, reporting, and verification, and really create a common ground for a discussion that can also share lessons across financing instruments, because sometimes we tend to discuss these issues in siloed ways that don't bring together stakeholders from both ecosystems. So Ben, what I'd like to ask you next is obviously the integrity and transparency associated with carbon credits in clean cooking has been subject to much debate. A lot of people might have seen a recent paper that was published by UC Berkeley on overcrediting in the sector recently. So with all of that in mind, could you tell us a bit about your work at ATEC, how carbon financing is integral to your work, and why a focus on DMRV is so critical? And just because I want to overburden you with even another question, can you also reflect a bit about the main technological challenges that are facing startups when it comes to DMRV?
Yeah, thanks, George, and thanks for having me. And yeah, it's been interesting listening to the conversation so far. I think that common thread, as you said, George, is that carbon credits are just really one form of results-based financing. The result you're looking to track and verify is around the emission reductions, but really that same technology interface can be used for any types of results-based financing. I think this is particularly prevalent in any kind of behavior change technology, such as cooking, but you could say the same with diesel gensets, water pumps, filters, etc. Is I think in the development sector, we've generally had not the best of track records of actually ensuring that people use the technology that is provided to them. We tend to be overly focused on distribution of product, a number of households reached, let's call it, rather than what is the actual adoption of that technology. And I think overall, that's where particularly IoT can really play a role in being able to verify is that technology actually uptaken and we're actually making really substantial improvements in the lives of people through a sustainable behavior change. And so I think carbon credits is leading the way there. Overall, I think the cook stove sector is again leading the way when it comes to sort of household-based, results-based financing through carbon credits as well. Just off our own estimations, if you look at decarbonising cooking globally, on sort of current pricing for data verified credits, see the market worth around about $32 billion per year for data verified carbon credits that can be generated off the cook stove sector. It's a significant sector. It's also the fastest growing sector globally as far as carbon credits generation goes. But as you mentioned, George, and we had Sam on just a second ago from UC Berkeley, it's also a market that's ridden with quite a bit of controversy at this point in time. You see the UC Berkeley report came out with the finding of 920% on average over crediting in the traditional cook stove sector. So the majority of that being improved cook stoves. And really the majority of that issue doesn't actually come back to FNRB, which is one discussion point. That's only around 15% of that overcrediting. Around about 85% of that overcrediting is overestimation of usage. And that's generally from poorly designed projects where improved cook stoves, for example, are thrown off sort of into villages with very little support and verification of if that product is actually adopted or useful to those households. And really the beauty, I think, and why it's so critical and integral for ATEC and others is with what we do, which is we're basically like a full stack sort of electric cooking technology provider. So we have our patent design, the hardware front end, and then the software and data that sits behind that, and the data science with that. We work with partners around the world, ideally working with local distribution partners in various parts of the world. It's the ability to actually track that usage on every single device and see if that technology is actually truly being adopted. Stove stacking is not something that's going to go away. For myself, I have 8 different cooking technologies in my house that I use on a regular basis, including my barbecue. I am Australian after all. We do love a barbecue. But, I use my Bosch induction stove for 90% of my daily cooking needs. And that's really what we need to ensure that's happening to do that transition. We can only really verify if that's happening through having data verified carbon credits. And I think the way I like to look at it is that really what we're seeing so far in the market is actually the price has been significantly suppressed in the voluntary carbon market because of the lack of verification. It's effectively spooked off people willing to pay a more significant premium given the high levels of overcrediting risk in the sector. And that's really only starting to wash out now with some good work done by UC Berkeley, but also others as well, to prove that actually effectively low quality projects have been able to claim relatively high amounts of emission reductions, and actually the price of carbon has been too cheap. I think Sam showed that report before showing a 30% price premium on SDG impact-linked carbon credits. If you look at, say, the Platts Household Index price, and you compare that to data-verified credits, particularly 100% data-verified credits, and that's an important part, we're seeing anywhere from a 2 to 4x price premium on data-verified credits compared to non-data-verified credits. And ultimately, we need to realize that people buying these credits be that companies, or more and more it's going to be governments and compliance markets moving forward. They're effectively buying an environmental license to operate through buying a carbon credit. If they can't stand behind that credit by having a fully auditable data trail that credit genuinely exists, then they're effectively putting their brand at risk. And this has been proven. I think it was Delta Airlines. I could have it wrong. Sorry, it was in California. I think it was Delta. It could have been another American airline, recently being subject to a class action lawsuit for making net zero claims on their flights. But the class action was that many of the credits they bought were false, and they were receiving a class action lawsuit. So that's a direct threat to their brand and their social license to operate. And this is not something that the carbon markets will continue to allow to happen. They will just walk away from this market if there isn't that verifiability that this credit did actually occur. So it's pretty critical moving forward. My last point on that is the good news is if you look at the Swiss market for carbon, if I start with the European market is around 100 euros a ton. Swiss market is around $150 a ton. As we get more into the Article 6 world, those kinds of prices are going to open out to the voluntary market. So we're really just at the start of this opportunity, but we've got to get our act together and ensure that we can show that a ton is actually a ton.
Thanks a lot, Ben. And if I could summarize some of your points, I think transparency, integrity, and impact are key, but they also cost money. And your point is, that in the future, investors are definitely going to value that. And you also talked a bit about on the impact side, the opportunities surrounding monetizing co-benefits, and of course, a lot of your customer base is predominantly female, so there are also really unique opportunities on that front as well. So thanks a lot for sharing that. On the carbon credits front, we're also going to soon, in the coming months, publish an interactive website in the GSMA that will help startups navigate some of the complexities associated with the voluntary carbon market, as this is a very fast evolving space, as you mentioned, Ben. So really looking forward to keeping the discussion going on that. I have a couple more questions for the panel, but I'll turn to one audience question because I think it'll be interesting maybe for different panelists to reflect on that. And maybe first to you, Kyle. Can you speak a bit about the availability of RBF programs in the context of the DRC and some of the challenges around harmonizing requirements of different donor organizations that might have different RBF windows into sort of one common window? And do you see opportunities for digital technologies in creating more harmonization and collaboration between different donor organizations as well? Because I do see a lot of RBF programs pop up, but then I'm always wondering how do companies actually navigate all these different windows with all these different requirements?
Yeah, thank you, George. Yeah, great question. Yes, so we definitely think there is a lot of room for multiple RBF programs to be operating even simultaneously, just because, at least in DRC, there's such significant energy poverty and growing and unmet and underserved demand. And just given the geographic complexity and size of Congo and the challenges, it really does require and justify multiple RBF programs. And we've been very excited to see so many other people see that. And so there have been several programs operating currently right now. The World Bank has just completed one program, and they're going to be launching a new program shortly in 2024. And then there's CEI Africa, the Universal Energy Facility, which we've already mentioned briefly before, and Beyond the Grid Fund Africa as well. And so we're just really thrilled to see that so many people, so many different programs are seeing RBF funding as really critical to unlocking critical equity and debt to really provide energy access to communities. And, Congo, there's, for example, less than 20% or about 20% of a population of 100 million people has energy access. And we know that even in the places where there is energy access, it's often unreliable and unevenly distributed. So we're just really thrilled to see this funding come in to support energy access in these markets. And I think, for me too, this is also a really important issue because, DRC's people and natural resources have made critical contributions to the world's renewable energy transition and carbon sequestration with forests and peat ecosystem services, and yet Congo's people still need to benefit from this renewable energy transition and energy access more broadly. So I think these RBF programs recognize that, and that's really critical. George, I want to make sure I'm answering all of your questions. Can you remind me again the second part of your question?
No, that was perfect, Cal. I'll take that as an answer just because I want to make sure everyone else still has the chance to come in. No, that was a great answer, and I really like the fact that you linked it also a bit to this broader discussion that we have in climate finance, maybe at multilateral levels, about climate justice as well. So really important point. So thanks a lot for bringing that in. Susan, I'm wondering on my questions with regards to multiple different donor organizations collaborating on RBF programs, what you see the role of platforms like Odyssey in this, and then an additional question, also potential intersections you see between your work on RBF programs and carbon credits and climate financing as well, because I know that's an area you're starting to look at with Odyssey as well. And if I can just ask to keep it a bit brief in terms of response, just so we can give everyone else the chance to come in as well.
Yeah, thanks, George. No, I think Kyle has an excellent point that there's still an enormous amount of need out there. It's great that donors are coming into this space to support it, but there does come a certain point where they can, almost slow down the progress if the proliferation of requirements is too different or too much, or it puts a great burden on the companies who are trying to participate in this program. And I think that's something that the administrators of these programs recognize very well. They have their own, stakeholders that they must answer to. And so there's that. But I think that there is a recognition that we should coalesce around a core set of metrics, of deliverables. We've been at this for many years now, so we know what are the key criteria we need to report on across programs, and we should standardize those. There will always be additional components that different programs will want to have, but moving towards kind of a standard, an industry standard around that will help everybody, and that's something that we're trying to chime in on as well. Regarding your second question, I think the place that we've stepped in and dipped our toe into most actively thus far has been around distributed renewable energy credits. So sort of a different instrument from the carbon credits, but essentially an instrument that corporate buyers in many cases will purchase to offset their scope 2 emissions, their electricity purchase impacts. And they can buy from distributed renewable energy producers. 1 megawatt hour of renewable energy production will equal 1 DREC renewable energy credit. And we've been facilitating some of those transactions on the platform and verifying the production of that energy.
Great, thanks a lot, Susan. And we cover some of the work that the DREC initiative does in the report as well. It's really interesting. So thanks a lot for sharing that. Ben, the next question from the audience for you. I don't know if you've already had the chance to answer it on LinkedIn, but I think it's a really interesting one. So it's, hi Ben, you mentioned how the carbon market could be seen as a form of an RBF. What do you think about the integration of the additional criteria required by both the carbon market and by donors in RBF programs? Is there a clash between the two which makes them mutually exclusive?
Yeah, I did just, and thanks for the question, Giuseppe, and I just did put a quick response in there. I mean, generally, I think it's on a case-by-case basis. When it comes to, say, carbon credits under, say, gold standard of Vera, they're buying them because, as they call them, charismatic credits that have these additional co-benefits. They're not claiming directly that their payment is making those co-benefits occur or are directly connected with them. They're an associated benefit. And depending on who your buyer is and then who is your RBF partner, you can quite often have a conversation with them of being able to combine a couple of financing streams together. Generally, we find carbon partners pretty happy to see that happen, because if that means that the more impact can happen or more credits can be generated, then that's great. And then the RBF partner is happy if there's more impact being generated at the same time. But I think generally more of the question tends to be around double counting on the finance side. So just ensuring that you're not doubling up and obviously counting the same finance streams twice in a project. That seems to be more of the concern from what I've found so far.
Thanks a lot, Ben. Stefan, turning to you next. You touched on it just a bit in your initial remarks, but I think it's such an important point in the sector, which is to make sure that access to catalytic funding is truly inclusive, and a range of local or smaller scale distributors can also access things such as results-based financing, carbon credits, maybe on the more commercial side, receivables financing as well. Can you share a bit about how A2EI is working to achieve that, and why it's also so important for the sector at large?
Yes, thanks, George. I think it's a really important point. Maybe myself, coming from the commercial side of the sector earlier, also on the local innovator side, one of the biggest headaches we always had, and also I think a lot of companies on the ground, is the sheer amount of reporting efforts they have to undergo to participate in different programs. Sometimes the reporting effort is significantly bigger than the perceived value out of the program, basically, especially if it's a small RBF, you might receive certain values out of it. It's a small company, trying to participate in a carbon market, which actually is not possible because the barriers for entry when it comes to reporting, but also for assessing the programs, is too big. And that is something that we, from the prospect side, through A2EI, would like to really address this gap and really make it more inclusive for local innovators. And one approach that we take here is obviously the idea to say prospect can act as a kind of one-stop shop for companies to share their data once and then decide, under being full control of basically still their own data, who they want to reshare the data with. So it could be that they share the data of their CRM system plus maybe a mobile money transaction and IoT data with prospect, and then they decide to share this with their local RIA for regulatory issues. They share it with an RBF program they participate in, or multiple ones. Or they can also share it with a digital verification service such as Carbon Clear, who is trying to bring in digital verification for carbon credits into the market, or DREG, the DREG organization. I think Susan already mentioned it, to report on renewable energy certificates directly, without having to redo this exercise over and over again. And I think that is something that will really help that already helps these small players, especially in the sector, local innovators, to reduce the amount that is associated with participating in different programs that are ramping up, but are still at a small scale. So basically, in the end, it's a really like a free-to-use one-stop shop for these local innovators of all sizes, which avoids a massive effort of resharing this data. And additionally, through the cooperation with the Get Invest team, which has a lot of basically local staff on the ground and really working closely with the local innovators, trying to basically support them in the adoption of digital tools and participating in the different programs around, without being locked in a particular solution that might be hindering them at a later stage to change the approach they're currently taking. And last but not least, and that's something that I personally am quite excited about, is the opportunity to mirror the data directly back to the local innovators. Basically, for prospect, we automatically apply metrics as like an industry-wide metrics, such as global performance standards, back to the innovators. So in the very moment they share the data with prospect, no matter from what source it comes, we streamline the data and basically present them indications, if it's for instance a PAYGO provider, on the PAYGO performance of their own portfolio, which allows them to really improve the business, to understand how they compare to the benchmark, which is sometimes very difficult. And a lot of the businesses we see here as local innovators are very complex, are very complicated. It's a credit business, it's a technical business, it's a distribution business, and has a lot of things to do with supply chain. So that's a bit like where we see definitely value in using prospect for local innovators.
Thanks a lot, Stefan. And we're almost at the end of the webinar, but I'm gonna give Susan one last question, real quick to answer, which is, if we were to think about some of the achievements that Odyssey has had with the Nigeria Rural Electrification Agency and the results-based financing program under the Nigeria electrification project, and wanted to replicate some of those lessons in DRC. How can that be done collaboratively, and how do you sort of effectively work on these digital monitoring tools with government and rural electrification agencies as well? I know, big question, but maybe just a quick answer. That would be amazing, just because we're almost at the end.
I mean, you give me 2 minutes to solve DRC energy access challenge. Good. No, I mean, I think some of the lessons from Nigeria, I mean, Nigeria is a story of scale and volume, and many different operators, the whole spectrum. And I think DRC is another story of scale and volume in a different way, in a very challenging way as well. So I think it makes sense to think about, I think you put it as interoperability of data, of being able to make sure that those of us who have different digital platforms, different ways to communicate, different ways, that we're all able to send our data from one to the other, that we're able to kind of agree on common definitions of things, that we're able to trace things back to the source, so we have a nice audit trail and verifiability. But they're going to need to be very, very many players and different configurations to operate in an environment like that. So I think it behooves everyone in the sector to make sure that we're all pushing in the same direction, and that we're all able to, on a technical level, as well, work together. And I think that's something that probably everyone can agree on here.
Thanks a lot, Susan. And I think this is a great way to segue to the conclusion, because I think what you've all shared is that, the challenges that you're all aiming to address, be it in this sort of mini grid space, solar home system place, in clean cooking, are immense. And the digital technologies have a huge role to play in helping, on the one hand, a lot of service providers in the sector to work more effectively in terms of their business operations, but also in terms of accessing different sources of funding, which can help them scale and serve low-income communities. And subjects such as interoperability, common definitions across funders, and reporting structures, and also collaboration were mentioned as being key. And I think the challenges that we're working on are so large that there's space for multiple different players from both the public and private sector to come together and think through how to best leverage digital innovation to scale access to results-based financing, but also carbon credits. And I'd just like to use this time at the end of the webinar to thank all of you for your time. And I think the work you're doing in your different roles is really important. And I'm just going to encourage the audience to reach out to you individually if you want to follow up. I'm sure there were follow-up questions I wasn't able to get to in the time that we had. Again, thank you. And just on the GSMA side, obviously you heard from Zach and Sam on the report, and please do watch out for our upcoming webinar, where we'll place a bit more of a focus on other financing mechanisms such as receivables financing, revenue-based sharing models as well, and the role that digital technology plays there. Thanks again to the audience as well, and to everyone who helped us organize this event. I think it will be available online as a recording as well, in case you want to share it with people that couldn't join during this particular time zone. Thanks a lot again, and looking forward to keeping the conversation going in various formats.